Hello, and welcome back to Haunted Slumber. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. Tonight, settle in for 2 hours of slow atmospheric horror stories, carefully narrated to help you relax, quiet your mind, and gently drift towards sleep. There will be only 2 or 3 ads during the first 10 minutes. After that, the rest of the journey will be completely uninterrupted. If you enjoy peaceful, eerie storytelling made for late-night listening, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another haunting tale. Now, get comfortable, let your body become completely still, and allow the sounds of the outside world to slowly fade into silence. Tonight, as sleep draws closer, the night grows quieter, the shadows begin to stir, and a forgotten story waits patiently in the darkness. So close your eyes, take a slow breath, listen carefully, and let the night carry you gently into haunted slumber. Let's begin. Story 1, the reports started slowly. At first, they were the kind of stories people barely noticed. Someone went hiking and never came home. A jogger left their car near one of the trails and disappeared. A fisherman's truck sat beside the river for 3 days before anyone realized no one knew where he was. People get lost around here. That was always the explanation. The woods are larger than they look from the road. Trails split, disappear, and reconnect without warning. In some places, the trees grow so close together that a person can lose their sense of direction after only a few minutes. Search parties went out. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters moved over the forest. Sometimes they found a backpack, a shoe, or a phone. Most of the time, they found nothing. Eventually, the searches stopped. The missing people became old photographs on social media. Their families continued posting birthday messages and asking for information, but everyone else moved on. That is what people do. Life continues because it has to. I never thought much about the disappearances. Not until they started happening around my trail. I have been jogging there for years. The trail sits several miles outside town, hidden behind a narrow road that most people do not notice unless they already know where it is. There is a small dirt parking area near the entrance and a weathered wooden sign showing the main route. The trail is not especially difficult. It climbs gradually through the trees before reaching an overlook above the valley. From there, you can see the river cutting through the forest below. I go there because it is quiet. Or at least, it used to be. There is something calming about moving through the woods with music in my ears. When I run there, I do not have to think about work, bills, failed relationships, or the empty rooms waiting for me at home. I only have to put one foot in front of the other. That afternoon began like every other visit. I parked my car in my usual place beneath an old oak near the far side of the dirt lot. There were 2 other vehicles nearby. One was a faded pickup truck. The other was a small silver hatchback. Nothing unusual. The sun hung low above the trees, turning the edges of the leaves orange. It was late enough that the temperature had begun to drop, but early enough that I knew I could reach the overlook before dark. I stretched beside the car. My knees had been bothering me lately, especially the left one. Age catches up with you in small ways before you notice the larger ones. I put my earbuds in, selected a playlist, and started running. The first section of the trail was almost flat. Dry leaves cracked beneath my shoes. Tree roots pushed through the soil, forcing me to adjust my steps every few yards. The music covered nearly everything else. I could not hear the birds. I could not hear the wind. I could only hear the steady beat in my ears and the dull thud of my own feet hitting the ground. It was a normal ritual. Jog to the overlook, rest for a few minutes, enjoy the view, then return to the car. I had repeated the same routine hundreds of times. There was comfort in knowing exactly where the trail would bend, exactly where the ground became steeper, exactly where the first glimpse of the valley appeared between the trees. I passed a wooden bench about halfway up. Someone had carved initials into it, a heart around 2 letters. I had noticed them before. That day, I found myself wondering whether the 2 people were still together. Probably not. Most people are temporary. That was something I had learned the hard way. I kept running. The trail narrowed near the top of the ridge. The forest opened just enough to let the fading sunlight through, and the ground became rockier beneath my shoes. When I finally reached the overlook, I slowed to a walk. My hands went to my hips. My chest rose and fell quickly. The overlook was simply a natural outcropping of stone extending from the hillside. There was no fence, no railing, and no sign warning people how dangerous the drop could be. That was part of what I liked about it. The place felt untouched. Below me, the valley stretched for miles. The river twisted through the trees, catching the last light of the day. I removed one earbud. The sound of rushing water reached me from far below. A breeze moved across the ridge. I closed my eyes. For a few minutes, everything felt peaceful. I thought about home. There was not much waiting for me there. A half-empty refrigerator. Laundry I had ignored for several days. A television. A bed that had felt too large since my divorce. My ex-wife used to complain about my running. She said I disappeared into the woods whenever I was angry. Maybe she was right. She had been right about several things. Not that I would ever tell her that. The sun touched the horizon. I checked the time. If I stayed much longer, I would be finishing the run in darkness. I put the earbud back in and started down the trail. The return trip was easier. Gravity helped. I let my mind drift with the music. I thought about what I might make for dinner. Maybe pasta. Maybe I would stop somewhere on the way home. Then something changed. At first, I could not identify it. I slowed. There was something wrong with the air. I removed one earbud. The smell reached me immediately. Perfume, not flowers, not pine. Perfume, strong, artificial, sweet. It felt completely wrong in the middle of the forest. I stopped running. The smell reminded me of elevators, department stores, and crowded bars. Manufactured, human. I removed the other earbud and placed both in the pocket of my shorts. Without the music, the forest seemed much larger. For several seconds, I heard nothing. Then footsteps came from farther down the trail. Fast, rhythmic, another runner. I should have felt relieved. Instead, something about the sound bothered me. I cannot explain why. The footsteps were ordinary. A person jogging uphill. Still, the sound made the hair on my arms rise. I looked around. There was a smaller side path a few yards away. It was barely visible between the trees, more of an old animal trail than an official route. I had walked it once before. It curved through the woods and eventually rejoined the main path close to the overlook. I stepped onto it. At first, I told myself I was simply avoiding the other runner. Sometimes I preferred being alone. That explanation almost made sense. I walked rather than ran. Through the trees, I caught a glimpse of the jogger. A woman. She was moving uphill at a steady pace. Dark running shorts, light-colored top, hair tied behind her head. The perfume must have belonged to her. Probably here for the same reason I was. Exercise, fresh air. A few minutes at the overlook. I should have continued toward my car. Instead, I stopped. Something in my body turned me around. There was no decision. At least, I do not remember making one. My feet simply changed direction. I began following the side trail uphill. A twig snapped beneath my shoe. The woman on the main trail kept running. She had not heard me. The side path curved through the trees. I moved faster. I knew where it rejoined the main route. If I kept my pace, I could reach the overlook close to the same time she did. The thought entered my mind with strange certainty. I did not question why that mattered. The forest seemed quieter. No birds, no wind, only my breathing. The smell of her perfume became stronger. I reached the overlook only a few seconds after she did. She stood near the edge with her back to me. Her hands were resting on top of her head as she caught her breath. For one moment, I simply watched her. She reminded me of my ex-wife. Not exactly. The hair was wrong. The body was different, but something about the way she stood brought my ex-wife into my mind so clearly that I almost heard her voice. Always leaving, always criticizing, always telling me what was wrong with me. The woman did not know I was there. I moved closer. I should have said hello. I should have turned around. I should have returned to my car. Instead, my hands lifted. They closed around her neck. The reaction was immediate. Her entire body became rigid. She tried to turn. I tightened my grip. A choking sound escaped her. She clawed at my wrists. I squeezed harder. There was no anger. That is what frightens me when I think about it. I was not furious. I was not screaming. I felt calm, almost curious. Her body thrashed against mine. She kicked backward and struck my shin. Pain flashed through my leg. I did not let go. She tried to shout, but my hands were crushing her throat. Her fingernails dug into my skin. One of her hands struck the side of my head. The impact made my ear ring. For a second, my vision flashed white. That only made me squeeze harder. Her movements became desperate, then weaker, then slower. Her hands stopped clawing. Her knees gave way. I followed her down. For several seconds, I remained there with my hands around her neck, even though she was no longer fighting. The river continued moving below us. The sun continued setting. Nothing in the world seemed to care. Eventually, I released her. She lay on her side. One arm was trapped beneath her body. Her eyes were partly open. There was something shocking about how quickly a person could become an object. A minute earlier, she had been running, breathing, thinking. Maybe she had been wondering what to make for dinner. Maybe someone was waiting for her. Now she was simply lying on the stone. I stared at her. I expected panic. I expected horror. I expected to ask myself what I had done. Instead, my first thought was that she could not stay there. Someone would find her. The realization felt practical. Simple, I looked toward the path. No one was coming. The valley below was already filling with shadow. I bent down and lifted her. She was heavier than I expected. Dead weight. I understood that expression for the first time. Her head fell backward over my arm. The perfume was overwhelming now. sweet enough to make my stomach turn. I carried her away from the overlook. There was a narrow path leading down the hillside toward the river. It was not part of the official trail system. Fishermen sometimes used it, and during the spring it became almost impossible to walk because of mud. That evening, the ground was dry. I started down. Branches caught her clothes. Her shoe struck a rock and almost came off. I adjusted my grip. The path grew steeper. My lungs burned. Sweat ran down my back. Once I nearly slipped and sent both of us rolling down the hill. I stopped to catch my breath. Her face was close to mine. For a moment, I thought she blinked. I almost dropped her. I stared. Nothing. The forest around us had become dark. I continued. When I reached the river, the remaining sunlight was barely visible through the trees. The water moved quickly. It had rained earlier in the week, and the current was stronger than usual. I carried the woman close to the bank. Her perfume mixed with the smell of mud and water. I held her for a few seconds. I do not know why. Then I let go. Her body hit the water with a loud splash. The current caught her immediately. For a moment, I saw one pale arm above the surface. Then she turned. The river carried her away. Within seconds, she disappeared around a bend. I stood there listening. My breathing sounded painfully loud. I looked at my hands. Red marks covered my wrists where her nails had scratched me. There was blood beneath one fingernail. I wiped it on my shorts. Then I started back toward the main trail. The climb was difficult. My legs shook. My throat was dry. By the time I reached the overlook again, the sky had become deep purple. The stone was empty. If I had not known what happened there, I would never have guessed. I walked down toward the parking lot. I did not put my earbuds back in. Every sound seemed important now. Leaves moving, small animals in the brush, branches cracking in the distance. Several times I thought I heard footsteps behind me. Whenever I stopped, the sound stopped too. I began walking faster. When I finally saw my car through the trees, relief moved through me. The parking lot was almost empty. The faded pickup was gone. The silver hatchback remained. Near the entrance to the trail, a bicycle was chained to a small wooden post. I stopped. It was a dark blue road bike. A water bottle was attached to the frame. A small bag hung beneath the seat. The woman had not driven here. She had ridden. That explained why there was no unfamiliar car. I stared at the bicycle. Again, I expected some moral voice inside me to speak. Nothing came. I walked toward it. The chain was not actually locked. It had only been looped around the post. I removed it. The bike was light. I rolled it toward my car and opened the trunk. It barely fit. I had to lower one of the rear seats. I pushed the bicycle inside and closed the trunk. My movements felt automatic, efficient. When I climbed into the driver's seat, I noticed my reflection in the rear view mirror. There was a red mark along the side of my head where she had hit me. For several seconds, I stared at myself. I looked tired. Nothing more. I turned the key. The engine started. As I pulled out of the parking area, I began whistling. I did not realize what I was doing until I reached the main road. It was an old tune. My ex-wife used to hate it when I whistled. She said I did it whenever I was pretending everything was fine. The road home was nearly empty. The forest passed on both sides of the car. Dark, endless, at the first traffic light in town, I stopped. A police cruiser pulled up beside me. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. The officer did not look at me. The light changed. He drove away. I laughed. A small sound at first, then louder. By the time I reached my apartment, I had stopped. I parked in my usual space. I left the bicycle in the trunk. Inside, everything looked exactly as it had that morning. The dishes were still in the sink. The laundry was still on the chair. My television remote was still on the couch. Normal. I showered. The hot water ran over the scratches on my wrists. They stung. I watched pink water move toward the drain. When I closed my eyes, I saw the woman's face. Not while she was dying. Before, her back turned, hands resting on her head. I opened my eyes. For one moment, I felt something close to regret. Then it disappeared. I made pasta. I ate in front of the television. The local news came on at 11. I almost changed the channel. Then a familiar trail appeared on the screen. The reporter stood in the parking area where I had been only hours earlier. A photograph appeared beside her. The woman, her name was Rachel Mercer, 34 years old. A nurse. She had gone for an evening bike ride and never returned home. Her family had reported her missing. Police had found no bicycle at the trail, no sign of an accident, no evidence that she had left willingly. The reporter reminded viewers that several people had disappeared in the same region over the previous 2 years. Authorities did not believe the cases were necessarily connected. I stared at the screen. Several people. I knew about the reports. Everyone around here did. I had always assumed the missing people had become lost, or had been kidnapped, or had fallen into the river. The reporter continued speaking. I heard almost none of it. A thought had entered my mind, a question. It was so simple that I did not understand why I had never asked it before. If people had been disappearing near the trail long before today, who had been taking them? Because I had never killed anyone before. At least, I did not think I had. I went to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The red mark on my head was already darkening. I touched it. A memory came to me. A man standing at the overlook. Not Rachel. Someone else. A gray beard. A green jacket. My hands around his throat. The image disappeared. I stumbled backward. No, another memory. A young man lying near the river. Blood on a stone. My hands carrying him. No, a woman crying. A shoe left beside the path. A backpack buried beneath leaves. My car trunk opening. Opening, closing. I gripped the sink. My reflection smiled. I was not smiling. I stepped back. The reflection continued to stare at me. Then it lifted one finger to its lips. Quiet. I ran from the bathroom. The television was still on. The reporter was discussing Rachel's disappearance. Behind her, beyond the police lights and parked cars, the trail disappeared into the trees. For a moment, I saw someone standing between them. A man. He looked like me. He raised one hand. Then the camera moved, and he was gone. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, I went to work. Everyone told me I looked tired. I said I had been jogging late. At lunch, someone mentioned the missing nurse. What kind of psycho takes people off a hiking trail? One of my coworkers asked. I laughed with everyone else. That evening, I drove home. At the intersection where I should have turned toward my apartment, my hands moved the steering wheel in the opposite direction. I watched them do it. I told myself to stop. My foot remained on the accelerator. The road narrowed. Buildings disappeared. Trees gathered around me. 20 minutes later, I pulled into the dirt parking area. The sun was low, exactly like yesterday. I turned off the engine. For several minutes I sat there. I could hear my own breathing. Then I reached for my earbuds. There were 3 cars in the lot, and near the trail entrance, someone was stretching before a run. I stepped out. The evening air smelled of pine. Somewhere in the distance, the river rushed through the valley. I put the earbuds into my ears. Then I began jogging toward the overlook. Story 2. My name is Alex, and I have lived in the Appalachian Mountains my entire life. If you grow up in these mountains, you learn pretty early that there is a difference between being afraid and being careful. People from outside the area sometimes hear something strange in the woods and immediately assume the worst. They hear a fox scream in the distance and think someone is being murdered. They hear coyotes calling to one another and swear they heard a woman crying. They see a shadow move behind a tree and imagine something supernatural. Most of the time, there is a normal explanation. I have heard black bears moving through yards after midnight. I have seen deer standing so still between trees that they looked like people from a distance. I have heard owls make sounds that would terrify anyone who had never heard them before. The mountains can be strange at night, but strange does not always mean dangerous. That is what I always believed. About 3 months ago, my fiancé and I bought a small house deep in the mountains. We had been looking for somewhere quiet for almost a year. Neither of us wanted to live near a crowded city. We wanted privacy, trees, cold mornings, a porch where we could drink coffee without listening to traffic. When we found the house, it seemed perfect. It was old but in good condition, sitting at the end of a narrow road surrounded by thick woods. The nearest town was about 20 minutes away by car. Our closest neighbor lived more than a mile down the road. There were no streetlights, no sidewalks, no stores nearby. At night, there was nothing around us except forest. That was exactly what we wanted. The first week was perfect. We unpacked boxes, cleaned the rooms, fixed a few loose boards on the porch, and started making the place feel like ours. During the day, sunlight came through the trees and filled the yard with moving shadows. Birds landed on the fence. Squirrels ran across the roof. Sometimes deer appeared near the edge of the woods in the early morning. My fiancée loved it. She took pictures constantly. Pictures of the house, pictures of the sunset, pictures of the fog between the trees. She sent most of them to her sister because her sister thought we were crazy for moving so far away from everyone. At night, we would sit on the porch and listen to the woods. The first few nights were peaceful. Then she stopped sleeping. At first, I did not notice. I would wake up in the morning and find her already in the kitchen with coffee. She looked tired, but I assumed she was still adjusting to the new house. Then one morning, she asked me a strange question. "Did you hear something outside last night?" I was eating breakfast. "What kind of something?" "Walking," I shrugged. "Probably a deer." She shook her head. "No? A bear?" "No," I smiled. "You know bears do walk around houses sometimes." She stared down at her coffee. These were footsteps. I laughed a little. Everything sounds like footsteps at night. She looked at me. 2 legs. Alex, something about the way she said it made me pause. Still, I did not believe anything unusual was happening. I had spent my whole life in these mountains. She had not. She was used to hearing cars, neighbors, doors closing, dogs barking. The forest at night was different. Every sound traveled. A branch snapping 50 yards away could sound like it was outside your window. I told her that. She did not argue. The next morning, she looked worse. Dark circles had formed beneath her eyes. "You heard it again?" I asked. She nodded. "What time?" "I don't know. Around 3, maybe. What did it do?" She wrapped both hands around her mug. "It walked around the house." "What do you mean?" "Slowly, around the porch, then around the side." I waited. It stopped outside the bedroom window. I tried not to smile. "You sure you weren't dreaming?" She gave me a look that immediately made me regret asking. I was awake. "Okay, I know what I heard. I believe you heard something. That's not the same thing." She was right. I believed she heard something. I did not believe it was a person. Over the next 2 weeks, the same conversation happened almost every morning. She would tell me the footsteps had returned. I would offer another explanation. Deer, bear, raccoon, branches rubbing against the house, something on the roof. Once, I even suggested the house itself might be making noises as the temperature changed. She stopped arguing after that. That bothered me more than if she had continued. She would just look at me and say, "Okay," then she would walk away. I started feeling guilty. I could see she was exhausted. She began taking naps during the afternoon because she was barely sleeping at night. A few times I offered to stay awake with her. She told me not to. "You need sleep too," she said. I promised I would wake up if she heard anything again. Apparently I slept very deeply. Then one night I woke up on my own. I do not know why. There was no loud noise, no sudden movement. I simply opened my eyes. The room was dark. For a second I thought I was alone. Then I saw my fiancée sitting upright beside me. She was staring at the window. Her whole body was stiff. I whispered her name. She did not turn. Instead, she said, very quietly, "Do you hear it?" I listened. Nothing. I almost told her no. Then came the sound. Crunch. A few seconds passed. Crunch. My body went completely still. Something was moving through the dead leaves outside. Slowly, one step at a time. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. It was not running. It was not wandering. It was walking with purpose. I listened carefully, waiting to hear the uneven movement of 4 legs. A deer has a rhythm. So does a bear. Once you have heard animals move through leaves enough times, you can usually tell the difference. This did not sound like 4 legs. Crunch, pause, crunch, 2 steps. Then, silence. The sound had stopped directly beneath our bedroom window. My fiancée reached over and grabbed my arm. Her nails dug into my skin. "I told you," she whispered. I did not answer. I was listening. For several seconds, there was nothing. Then I heard whispering. That sound still bothers me more than anything else. It was quiet. Too quiet to understand. At first, I thought it might be wind moving through the trees. Then I heard separate voices, or what sounded like separate voices, several low sounds overlapping one another, like people whispering around each other. I could not understand any words. My brain kept trying to organize the sounds into language. For a second, I thought I heard my name. Then I thought I heard something like, "Come outside." Then the words disappeared again. The whispering was not coming from the woods. It sounded like it was directly outside the glass. My fiancée's grip tightened. I could feel her shaking. I finally understood why she had stopped sleeping. I got out of bed. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "I'm checking." "No, it could be someone messing with us." "Alex, don't. If it's somebody outside the house, I need to know." I walked to the gun safe. I had grown up hunting, so I kept a rifle in the house. I unlocked the safe, loaded it, and grabbed a flashlight. The whispering stopped. That somehow made everything worse. I stood near the bedroom door. My fiancée was still sitting in bed. "Stay inside," I told her. She looked like she wanted to argue, but she only nodded. I walked through the house. Every room seemed darker than usual. The kitchen windows reflected my own flashlight back at me. The living room was silent. Nothing moved near the front door. I unlocked it. Cold night air entered the house. I stepped onto the porch with the rifle in one hand and the flashlight in the other. The yard was empty. I swept the beam across the grass. Nothing. I checked beside the porch. Nothing. I looked toward the driveway, empty. Then I moved the light toward the tree line. That was when I saw it. Something was standing just inside the woods, maybe 30 yards away. At first, my brain tried to turn it into a tree. Then it moved slightly. I froze. It was tall, far too tall. I do not know exactly how tall because distance can be hard to judge in darkness, but it looked taller than any person I had ever seen. Its body was pale enough that my flashlight caught it immediately. It was incredibly thin, not normal thin. Its arms seemed too long for its body, hanging almost straight down toward its knees. It was not hiding. That detail matters. If it had been a person trespassing, they would probably have stepped behind a tree after seeing the light. This thing did not move. It stood in the open space between the trunks, looking at me. I cannot remember seeing eyes. I cannot remember seeing a mouth. Its face seemed almost blank from that distance. But I knew it was looking directly at me. There was no question. The same way you can feel someone staring at you across a room. For several seconds, neither of us moved. I heard my own breathing. The rifle felt suddenly very heavy in my hands. I raised the flashlight higher. The thing leaned forward, only slightly. It did not bend like someone preparing to run. It looked curious, like an animal trying to understand what it was seeing. That movement terrified me. I raised the rifle. I did not shout a warning. I did not ask who was there. I fired. The gunshot exploded through the valley. My ears rang. The thing turned. Then it disappeared into the trees faster than anything I had ever seen. It did not run normally. There was no crash through the brush, no branches snapping, no leaves being kicked around. 1 second, it was standing there. The next, there was nothing. I kept the rifle aimed at the woods. My hands were shaking. Behind me, the front door opened. My fiancée stood inside. "Did you hit it?" "I don't know." "What was it?" "I don't know." That was the first time I admitted it. We did not sleep for the rest of the night. I kept lights on throughout the house and sat near the front window with the rifle. Nothing came back. At sunrise, I walked into the woods. I found the exact place where the figure had been standing. There should have been tracks. The ground was soft enough. There were leaves everywhere, and it had rained earlier that week. Nothing, no footprints, no broken branches, no blood. I found the tree behind where it had stood and searched for the bullet. Eventually, I found a fresh mark in the bark I had missed. Part of me felt relieved. Another part wished I had hit it, because blood would have proved that the thing had actually been there. We called the sheriff. He came out later that morning. He was an older man who had worked in the county for years. I had seen him around before, but did not know him personally. We told him what happened. He listened quietly. At first, he suggested a bear. I told him it had been standing on two legs. Bears do that. Not like this. How tall? I don't know. 7 feet, maybe more. He nodded. That can still be a bear. It had arms. Bears have arms. You know what I mean. He gave me a tired look. Then he walked into the woods with us. He checked the area. He looked at the tree where the bullet had struck. He searched the ground. No tracks. He seemed bothered by that, only for a second. Then his expression changed. Probably someone trespassing, he said. With no footprints? The ground is uneven. It was soft mud. He did not answer immediately. My fiancée was watching him closely. Then she asked, "Has anyone else reported this?" The sheriff looked at her. There was a pause. A very small one. "No," he said. Something about that answer felt wrong. Not the word itself, the delay before it. He looked toward the woods again. Then he told us to call if anything else happened. Before leaving, he stopped beside his vehicle. "You folks planning on staying here long?" I thought it was a strange question. "We just bought the place." He nodded. Then he looked at the house. "If it were me, I'd keep the outdoor lights on at night." That was all he said. My family did not believe us. My father laughed when I told him. He said I had probably seen a bear standing upright. One of my cousins told me I had been listening to too many Appalachian horror stories online. Most of our friends were polite, but I could tell they thought we were exaggerating. The truth is, some days I did not know what to believe either. Maybe my fiancé's fear had gotten into my head. Maybe I saw a person. Maybe the darkness changed the shape. Maybe the flashlight created strange shadows. Maybe I fired at a tree because I was half asleep and afraid. I repeated those explanations to myself many times. The only problem was that I remembered the way it moved. I remembered that too clearly. We lasted 11 more days in the house. The footsteps returned twice. The first time, they stopped near the back porch. The second time, they circled the entire house. We did not look outside. We did not open the door. The whispering returned once. It came from somewhere near the kitchen window. My fiancée cried silently beside me while I held the rifle. Neither of us spoke. The next morning, we started packing. We moved into a smaller place closer to town. It cost more and we hated having neighbors nearby, but neither of us cared. For months, we did not talk about the old house. We avoided the subject completely. If someone asked why we moved so soon, we said the location was inconvenient. That explanation was easier. I tried to forget. Eventually, daily life started feeling normal again. My fiancée began sleeping through the night. I stopped checking windows whenever I heard something outside. Then, a few weeks ago, everything came back. We were unpacking some boxes we had never bothered opening after the move. My fiancée found an old phone. It was the phone she had been using when we first moved into the mountain house. The battery was dead, so she charged it. Later that evening, she sat on the couch scrolling through old pictures. I was in the kitchen when she suddenly said my name. "Alex." Something in her voice made me turn immediately. She had gone pale. "What?" She did not answer. She just held out the phone. I walked over. There was a photograph on the screen. At first, I did not understand why she was showing it to me. It was an ordinary picture of our old backyard. Sunset. Orange sky. Dark trees. Part of the back porch, visible in one corner. "I sent this to my sister," she said. "When?" "About a week before that night." I looked at her. So, she took the phone and zoomed in. My stomach dropped. Between two trees at the edge of the yard stood a pale figure. Tall, thin, long arms. The exact same shape I had seen when I went outside with the rifle. It was partly hidden by distance, but there was no mistaking the proportions. My fiancé had taken the picture days before I ever saw it. Neither of us had noticed. I sat down. For a while, we said nothing. There it was. Proof, or at least something close enough to proof that I could no longer tell myself I had imagined the entire thing. I stared at the picture for hours that night. I increased the brightness, adjusted the contrast, zoomed in until the image became blurry. The figure remained. That alone was terrifying. But eventually, I noticed something worse. I had always assumed the thing had been watching our house. That made sense. It walked around the porch. It stood outside the window. It had appeared at the tree line. So when I first saw the photograph, I thought it had been watching us long before we realized it. Then I looked at the angle of its body, its shoulders, the direction of its head. The figure was not facing the house. It was facing away from us, deeper into the forest. I looked again. Same result. It was not watching my fiancé take the picture. It was not watching our bedroom. It was not watching the house at all. It was staring into the woods. That realization changed everything. I started thinking about the whispering. At the time, I had assumed the tall figure made those sounds. But what if it did not? What if the thing I saw was not the thing walking around our house? What if it had been standing near the trees for some other reason? Watching, waiting, maybe it had been listening too. I went through every picture on the old phone. Most were normal. Then, we found two more. In one, taken from the front porch, there was a pale shape barely visible near the far trees. It was impossible to say for certain whether it was the same thing. In another photograph, taken several days later, there was nothing visible. But when I zoomed toward the woods, I noticed that several deer stood near the edge of the yard. All of them were facing the same direction. Into the forest. None were eating. None were looking toward the camera. They were simply standing still, watching something deeper in the woods. My fiancée refused to look at the pictures anymore. She asked me to delete them. I did not. I transferred everything to my computer. I also saved copies in several places because part of me was afraid the images would disappear. I have considered going back to the property. I know that sounds stupid. Maybe it is. But I want answers. I want to know whether there is something in those woods. I want to know whether the tall figure is still there. I want to know what it had been watching. But every time I seriously consider driving back, I remember the sheriff. That is another part of the story I cannot stop thinking about. His reaction was too calm. Not in the normal way an experienced officer stays calm. It felt practiced. When my fiancé asked whether anyone else had reported something similar, he paused before saying no. I have replayed that moment many times. Maybe I am reading too much into it. Maybe he was simply choosing his words. But there was something in his face. Recognition. That is the only word I can use. Then there was his final advice. Keep the outdoor lights on. Why? If he truly believed it was a bear, outdoor lights would not guarantee anything. If he believed it was a trespasser, he should have warned us about people in the area. Instead, he told us to keep the lights on. I recently spoke to the man who lives down the road from the old house. I did not tell him everything. I just asked whether he had ever heard strange sounds in the woods. He became quiet. Then he asked why. I told him we used to hear footsteps around the house. He did not laugh. He said, "That's why the last people left." I asked what he meant. He refused to explain. He told me not to go back there at night. Then he ended the conversation. I have tried calling him again. He does not answer. So now I am left with the photographs, the memory, the sound of those footsteps, and one question I cannot stop asking. If the pale thing was not looking at our house in that first picture, what was it watching? Because whatever answer I come up with is worse than the last. Maybe it was afraid. Maybe it was guarding the edge of the woods. Maybe it was waiting for something to come out. And maybe, on the night we heard whispering outside our bedroom window, whatever it had been watching finally did. I used to think the tall figure was the reason we left that house. Now, I'm starting to wonder whether it was the only thing keeping something else away. And if that is true, then I have one more question. Why did it disappear after I fired at it? Did I scare it away? Or did I accidentally remove the only warning we had? I still believe the sheriff knew more than he told us. And lately, I have started wondering whether the reason he told us to keep the lights on was not so we could see what was outside. Maybe it was so whatever lived in the woods could see the house clearly enough to stay away. Story 3. Before I explain what happened, I should probably tell you something about myself. I spent 2 tours in Iraq as a weapons officer in an Apache gunship. Most of the time, we were the ones doing the shooting, not the ones taking it. From 1,000 feet in the air, you had to make decisions quickly. 30mm rounds were powerful, but they were not perfect. They could spread, bounce, hit things you did not intend to hit, and cause damage in ways that were difficult to predict. I tried to be careful. Not everyone was. Back at the base, though, we were not untouchable. We took rocket fire 3 times during my deployments. Several aircraft were damaged or destroyed while sitting on the ground, and one of those attacks left me with severe tinnitus. That ringing never really went away. Some days it was only a faint whistle in the background. Other days it was like having a fire alarm buried inside my skull. I have no idea how my life went from sitting inside an Apache to becoming the principal of a K-12 school district in Central Texas, but somehow that is exactly what happened. Honestly, I thought I would be one of the last people they considered for the job, partly because of my military background, mostly because I had to ask people to repeat themselves all the time. But they hired me. I learned very quickly that managing a school filled with around 1,500 students was its own kind of war. I do not mean that disrespectfully. Combat was obviously different. But there was something familiar about the constant pressure. You were responsible for hundreds of people at once. Every decision affected someone else, and one bad choice could create chaos faster than you imagined. Then the pandemic happened. We knew the start of that school year was going to be difficult. It was August. COVID was still making everyone nervous. And we fully expected to shut down classrooms again if cases started spreading. We had masks, sanitizer, temperature checks, remote learning plans ready to go. We expected outbreaks. We expected angry parents. We expected teachers calling in sick and classes having to move online. What we did not expect was what actually happened. It began on a Tuesday morning. I had finished the school-wide announcements and was sitting in my office working through the usual paperwork when I received a call asking me to come to the east side of the building. A second-grade teacher named Mrs. Eddy needed help. When I arrived outside her classroom, I found Mrs. Eddy arguing with our primary school nurse. His name was Mr. Thor. That was really his name. And yes, he looked exactly like you would expect someone named Thor to look. He was huge. Broad shoulders, bald head, thick arms. He looked more suited to throwing people out of bars than treating scraped knees and stomach aches. Mrs. Eddy was clearly panicking. "I'm telling you, something is wrong," she said. Thor held both hands up. "I'm not saying nothing is wrong. I'm saying there are a lot of possibilities." Mrs. Eddy pointed towards her classroom. 10 minutes ago it was 4 girls. Now it's almost a third of the class. What symptoms? Itching. Where? Arms, shoulders, their backs. Thor began listing possible causes. Mosquito bites, some other insect, poison oak. We had a patch near one of the western entrances that maintenance had been slow to remove. He mentioned chickenpox, heat rash, an allergic reaction. I looked through the narrow window in the classroom door. Around 20 students stared back at us. At least 10 of them were scratching themselves constantly. And I do not mean a casual itch. They were digging their fingernails into their skin like dogs covered in fleas. Mrs. Eddy turned towards Thor. "There are no bugs in that room. I came in through the east entrance, nowhere near the poison oak, and I had chicken pox when I was a kid." Then she pulled the collar of her shirt down and turned her shoulder towards us. "Now explain this." Thor's expression changed immediately. The skin across Mrs. Eddy's shoulder, upper arm, and part of her back was bright red and swollen. That alone could have been an allergic reaction. The strange part was the pattern. Small darker marks covered the rash. They looked like little X-shaped dents pressed into her skin. Thor leaned forward. Then Mrs. Eddy moved closer to show him. He immediately raised his hands and stepped backwards. "What?" she demanded. "Now you're scared?" Before Thor could answer, screaming came from inside the room. I opened the door. 2 boys had begun scratching themselves so violently that their fingers were covered in blood. One had torn open the skin on his forearm. The other had blood soaking through the back of his shirt. They seemed unable to stop. Thor rushed towards them. "Okay, hands down. Both of you. Stop scratching." Neither listened. He carefully grabbed one boy's wrists while I helped with the other. Thor decided to take both students to the nurse's office. By then, 12 children were complaining of severe itching. I told Mrs. Eddy to keep everyone calm. Thor said he would bring back cortisone cream. We had barely stepped into the hallway when my radio came alive. The main office needed both of us on the south wing. Immediately, another classroom. 4th grade this time. I radioed back that we were coming and called Miss Valerie, the nurse's assistant, asking her to take bandages and anti-itch cream to Mrs. Eddy. Then Thor and I headed south. As we walked, my tinnitus became louder. The stress had already started working on me. That ringing always became worse when I was tired, nervous, or angry. The sound came and went in waves. For a moment, I was back in Iraq. Sirens, rocket warnings, running between bunkers, trying to understand whether the explosion I heard was close or far away. I forced the memory down. This was a school, not a military base. When we reached Mr. Bowden's classroom, he was standing outside the door. Mr. Bowden had a thick salt and pepper beard and looked almost as worried as Mrs. Eddy. He kept scratching his beard as he spoke. 6 kids started complaining about headaches. I was about to send them to the nurse's office. He looked towards Thor. Then 2 of them passed out. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "I'm fine." He paused. "I think." We entered. I tried smelling the air through my mask. Mostly I smelled my own hot breath trapped inside the fabric. Nothing chemical, nothing burned, no gas, no smoke. "Everybody listen," I said. "Raise your hand if you have a headache." Around half the class raised their hands. "Keep them up." "Now, does anyone have itching, a rash, or irritation on your arms, shoulders, or back?" Several students without headaches raised their hands. A few who already had their hands up kept them raised. Thor moved towards the 2 unconscious students. "I'm putting them in the recovery position. I'll get the new PE teacher to help move them." He looked at me. "What's his name again?" My brain stalled for a second. "Frank Donovan." "Right, Frank." Thor started towards the door. I followed and lowered my voice. "What the hell is happening?" Thor wiped sweat from his bald head. "I don't know." That's comforting. It could be one thing affecting everyone. Something environmental. An irritant in the air. Then why different symptoms? I'm getting there. Or we could have multiple problems happening at once. Maybe an allergen in one classroom and carbon monoxide in another. You don't think this is COVID? Not like this. I looked through the classroom window. Food delivery comes Tuesdays. Thor nodded. The truck could be sitting beside an intake vent. Exactly. Exhaust gets pulled into the ventilation system. Possible we move these classrooms to the gym and open windows everywhere else. Thor shook his head. Careful, if this is an outside industrial release, opening the windows makes it worse. That stopped me. A train derailment. A chemical fire. Something blown towards us by the wind. It could be the science labs, I said. Thor looked directly at me. Do you think we should evacuate? That was the question I had been avoiding. An evacuation could save lives. It could also move 1,500 children directly into whatever was outside. We don't know whether the problem is inside or outside, I said. I'm not ordering an evacuation yet. I took a breath. But get paramedics here for the 2 unconscious students. Thor nodded. If EMS can't reach us, we'll know there's something bigger happening outside. Good point. We split up. I contacted the office and asked Mrs. Goodwin, my secretary, to call emergency services. I also asked her to check whether there were any reported chemical spills, fires, train accidents, air quality warnings, unusual pollen levels, anything. Mrs. White was teaching chemistry that day. I asked her to inspect the science labs. Then I headed towards the loading area near the cafeteria. As I moved through the building, I tried remembering my old CBURN training. Chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, mustard agents could cause severe skin irritation and blisters, but usually not immediately. Carbon monoxide explained the headaches and fainting, but not the rashes. Chlorine would cause coughing and burning. Phosgene would damage the lungs. Ammonia had an obvious smell. None of it fit. Mold? Possible, but strange. Some kind of fungal contamination inside the ventilation system? Maybe. I kept hoping to find a delivery truck sitting beside an air intake with the engine running. That would have been simple. Turn it off. Ventilate the building. Call paramedics. Problem solved. I reached the cafeteria. The room had glass doors and large windows on almost every side, making it look like a giant fish tank. At that time of morning, it should have been mostly empty except for cafeteria workers and a few students involved in early programs. Instead, several dozen students and staff members were still inside. At first, I could not understand what they were doing. Then I realized they were laughing, every single one of them. Some sat at the long tables. Others leaned against the walls. They were laughing so violently that many were struggling to breathe. It was not normal laughter. It sounded painful. Wheezing, howling, animal-like. People were crying from laughing so hard. Some bent over clutching their stomachs. Others threw their heads back and screamed with laughter. The strangest part was the way it moved through the room. One group would begin slowing down, gasping for breath. Then another group would explode into renewed laughter. That sound seemed to trigger the first group again, back and forth, like a call and response. I stood outside the cafeteria for what felt like 5 minutes. I was terrified. The delivery truck was nowhere in sight. My radio crackled again. At first, because of my tinnitus and the laughter, I could barely understand it. I moved into an empty classroom and closed the door. Mrs. White reported that she had found nothing unusual in the science laboratories. Mrs. Goodwin said emergency services had no reports of outside air quality problems. Weather services showed nothing dangerous. Then her transmission suddenly cut off. I pressed the radio button. Mrs. Goodwin? Nothing, office. Come back. Still nothing. Then the class bell rang. Within seconds, hundreds of students flooded the corridors. Lockers opened and slammed. Students shouted across the halls. Normal laughter mixed with nervous conversations. My tinnitus became so loud that everything turned into one wall of noise. I decided to return to the office. Halfway there, I heard screaming from the grand staircase. Not laughter, real fear. I pushed through the crowd and found several high school students lying across the steps. Around a dozen had fallen. Some seemed pinned against the staircase by their own bodies, struggling to stand but unable to coordinate their movements. They clutched their heads. Their eyes were squeezed shut. Their arms moved strangely above them, wrists twisting as though they were turning invisible knobs in the air. For a second, my old training returned with terrifying clarity. Nerve agents, muscle spasms, loss of control. I held my breath automatically. But other students stood only feet away and appeared completely healthy. That made no sense. I ordered unaffected students to move towards their classrooms. Then I helped several of the collapsed teenagers. 2 vomited while I guided them down the stairs. Others managed to hold the central railing and slowly pull themselves towards the bottom. I told them to stay there. I'm getting help. I ran to the office. Call multiple EMS teams, I told Mrs. Goodwin. Not one ambulance, multiple. Then I contacted Thor. The 2 4th graders who had fainted were awake. That should have been good news. It was not. They now had dizziness, nausea, severe headaches, twitching legs, and swelling around the knees. Think, I said. What connects all of this? Thor sounded exhausted. Could be water. Water? Did you drink coffee this morning? I'm the principal of a K through 12 school. Of course I drank coffee. Office coffee? Yes, I'm thinking maybe something got into the water supply. A drug. Some stupid high school prank. Something placed in a tank or drinking fountain. That would have to be one hell of a drug. I described the cafeteria. Then the staircase. Different symptoms everywhere. Thor went quiet. Most of the affected rooms are on the east and south side. I looked at the building map pinned beside Mrs. Goodwin's desk. He was right. Those areas face the cafeteria annex. So maybe it's something in the annex, Thor said. Like what? There was another pause. Then he said, the summer science projects. I had forgotten about them. Students participating in the summer science fair had left their displays in the second floor convention area. Maybe one of those projects is doing more than anyone thought, Thor said. That sounds ridiculous. So does everything else. He had a point. I ordered classes on the east and south sides of the building moved temporarily into the northwestern gymnasiums. For the remaining classrooms, I told teachers to keep students inside and, as a precaution, open windows where it seemed safe. I asked Frank Donovan and Miss Valerie to remain with the students at the grand staircase until paramedics arrived. Then Thor and I went upstairs. Normally, I would never intentionally approach a possible environmental hazard without protective equipment. But we had no idea what protection we needed. Masks, respirators, radiation gear, gloves. Nothing made sense. So we went in carrying nothing but our radios, and the hope that we would recognize the problem when we saw it. The science fair exhibits filled the second floor convention center. The room was about the same size as the cafeteria. Displays stood along every wall, with another long double-sided row running through the center. There must have been more than 150 projects. Chemistry, biology, electricity, engineering, robotics, environmental science. By then, my tinnitus was worse than I could ever remember. The ringing almost completely covered Thor's voice. I walked slowly between the displays. I searched for leaking containers, overgrown petri dishes, broken batteries, homemade electrical devices. Anything halfway across the room, my eyes began watering. My nose twitched. I stopped. Was I reacting to something? I tried smelling the air. Nothing. Only ringing. That horrible endless ringing. I continued around the next row. Then I saw Thor. He was on the floor. For one terrible second, I thought he was dead. He lay curled into a fetal position, both hands pressed over his ears, his whole body twisted in pain. I rushed towards him. Thor. I could barely hear my own voice. My tinnitus had become deafening. I knelt beside him. I'm getting help. Then I noticed the science project directly in front of him. The title read, Ghost Simulator. I stared at it. The main device was a plain gray box with a thick electrical cord coming from the back. The display explained that the machine used ultra-low frequency sound, electromagnetic energy, and microwaves to stimulate sensitive organs in the human head. Eyes, ears, the brain. According to the project, those forms of energy could cause people to experience fear, the sensation of being watched, unexplained dread, headaches, and visual effects such as glowing orbs appearing at the edges of vision. My mind immediately went to news reports I had seen over the previous few years. American diplomats suffering mysterious neurological symptoms overseas. Headaches, dizziness, pressure, hearing problems. People had argued that directed microwave or sonic devices might be responsible. Havana syndrome. Could some unusually gifted student have accidentally constructed something similar? A device meant to reproduce the feeling of a haunting? I looked at Thor. A huge man had been reduced to a trembling ball on the floor. Meanwhile, I was standing directly beside the machine and had not collapsed. Then I remembered my tinnitus. Maybe my hearing damage made me react differently. Maybe that was why the ringing had become so severe instead. Thor groaned. I reached for the electrical cord. If the device was causing this, I would unplug it. My hand stopped. It was already unplugged. The cable had been neatly wrapped with a twist tie. A plastic safety cap covered the plug. I stared at it. That made no sense. I picked up the gray box. It was surprisingly light. I found the cover and opened it. The inside was empty. No speakers, no microwave generator, no coils, no batteries, no electronics at all. Only the end of the fake cable. I looked back at the display board. A paper flap had been attached near the bottom. Written on it was a question. What did you experience when I turned it on? I lifted the flap. The answer underneath explained everything. Nothing had been turned on. The entire experiment was psychological. The ghost simulator did absolutely nothing. The student's point was that expectation alone could cause people to convince themselves they were experiencing strange sensations. Fear created the ghost, not the machine. I stood there staring at the words. Then something odd happened. My tinnitus began to fade. Not completely. It never completely disappears, but the overwhelming attack that had nearly blocked out every other sound suddenly weakened. I looked down at Thor. He was still in pain. I called for help. By that afternoon, the school looked like the site of a disaster. Ambulances lined the entrance. Paramedics moved through hallways. Environmental teams collected air samples. Workers took cultures from walls and vents. Students received throat swabs, COVID tests, blood tests, and other medical examinations. Investigators checked water sources. Ventilation systems were inspected. The cafeteria was tested. The science wing was tested. Nothing unusual was found. Even stranger, the sick people recovered almost as quickly as they had become ill. Mrs. Eddie's rash faded. The students who had scratched themselves stopped itching. Thor recovered. The laughing students and cafeteria staff calmed down. The fourth graders improved. The teenagers on the staircase regained control of their bodies. Within hours, most of them seemed almost normal. A handful of students tested positive for COVID, but it was an ordinary strain and did not explain what we had witnessed. No chemical agent was discovered, no dangerous bacteria, no toxic mold, no contaminated water, no environmental accident, nothing. For days afterwards, I could not stop thinking about that fake ghost machine. Then I started thinking about the students, about the teachers, about myself. We had all returned to school after spending more than a year hearing the same message. Stay home. Stay apart. Do not touch anyone. Do not stand too close. Wash your hands. Wear a mask. Someone near you might be infected. You could become sick. You could become very sick. Someone you love could die. Then suddenly, we were all pushed back together. 1,500 students, teachers, staff, parents, crowded hallways, shared classrooms, shared bathrooms, shared cafeterias, everyone pretending things were almost normal while knowing the threat had never completely disappeared. Maybe the fear never left. Maybe it only waited. One child starts scratching. Another notices. A teacher panics. Someone hears there are 6 students in another classroom. A child develops a headache. Another feels dizzy. Somebody faints. Rumors begin moving faster than information. People become convinced something is in the air. Then the body reacts to the fear as though the danger is real. Once enough people believe it, the panic feeds itself. Mass psychogenic illness. Mass hysteria. That is the best explanation anyone ever gave me. It is the explanation I use when people ask. And maybe it is correct. The human brain can do incredible things when it believes it is in danger. I learned that in Iraq. I saw soldiers hear explosions that were not there. I watched men wake from sleep already reaching for weapons. For months after coming home, I sometimes smelled burning even when there was no smoke. Fear leaves marks. Sometimes those marks are deeper than scars. Maybe our students and staff had spent 18 months under pressure without ever truly releasing it. Maybe that Tuesday morning was when all of that fear finally found a way out. A rash, a headache. Laughter, twitching, fainting, pain, the symptoms did not need one physical cause because the cause was inside all of us. That is what I tell myself. It is certainly better than believing some invisible force moved through the school that morning and disappeared before anyone could identify it. What I know for certain is that the incident was the first time since leaving the military that I truly felt responsible for people who might die while under my watch. In Iraq, I understood the threats. Rockets, gunfire, explosives, you could train for those. You could study them. You could learn what they sounded like and what they did. That day at the school, I had 1,500 children around me, dozens suddenly becoming sick in completely different ways, and no enemy I could see. For the first time in years, I felt exactly as helpless as I had during those rocket attacks. Maybe nothing supernatural happened. Maybe nobody was poisoned. Maybe it really was only fear spreading from one person to another. But I will never forget standing beside that empty gray box while Thor twisted on the floor, reading the words that told me the machine had never been switched on. Because the most frightening part was not that the ghost simulator might have worked, it was that it did not. And somehow, we experienced everything anyway. Story 4. I sat on the front step of my new house and let out a long, tired breath as the sound of my family's cars slowly disappeared down the road. For the first time all day, everything was quiet. We had spent most of the morning and afternoon carrying boxes from my old apartment into the new house. My apartment had been small, cramped, and always felt crowded no matter how clean I kept it. I had spent years saving money, cutting back on holidays, saying no to things I wanted, and telling myself that eventually I would own a place of my own. Now I finally did. The house was not huge, but it was mine. It had 2 floors, 3 bedrooms, an old fireplace in the living room, and a narrow garden at the back. The previous owners had renovated most of it before selling, but they had kept some of the older details. There were wooden beams in the ceiling, deep windowsills, and old brass handles on some of the doors. It was exactly the kind of place I had imagined owning one day. As I sat there on the front porch, watching the sun sink behind the neighboring roofs, a soft evening breeze moved across my face. I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Peace. My back hurt. My arms were sore. My hair was tied into a messy knot, and I was still wearing the same old jeans I had put on early that morning. Still, I smiled. I had done it. I had a home. After a few minutes, I finally stood and went back inside. Boxes filled nearly every room. Some had been labeled carefully, while others only had my sister's rushed handwriting across the sides. Kitchen, bathroom, clothes, random stuff. My family had helped more than I expected. My dad had spent half the day carrying furniture and insisting he did not need help, even while rubbing his back every 10 minutes. My mom had started organizing the kitchen before I had even decided where anything should go. My brother, Carl, had somehow managed to disappear every time something heavy needed lifting, but magically returned whenever food arrived. My sister Marcy had taken charge of decorating suggestions. She had already told me 3 times that the living room needed more color. Before leaving, they had all hugged me, wished me luck, and promised to visit soon. Only after they were gone did I notice the gifts. 3 wrapped presents sat together near the fireplace. I smiled as soon as I saw them. Of course. My family never knew how to leave without adding something extra. I was far too tired to cook, so I ordered pizza, changed into comfortable clothes, and settled on the living room floor surrounded by cardboard boxes and crumpled packing paper. When the food arrived, I ate directly from the box. It felt perfect. After 2 slices, I reached for the smallest gift. The wrapping paper was folded neatly around the corners, every edge perfectly straight. I laughed. That had to be Marcy. My sister had always been a perfectionist. Even as a child, she wrapped Christmas presents as if she worked in an expensive department store. I carefully opened it. Inside was a ceramic mug. Painted across the side were small stick figures representing our family. My parents stood in the middle, with me, Marcy, and Carl beside them. Even our dog and cat had been added. It was simple and slightly childish. I loved it immediately. I held it for a moment, smiling at the tiny painted faces. Definitely Marcy, I said to myself. The second gift was much bigger and much heavier. I dragged it closer and peeled away the paper. Inside was a beautiful set of vintage-style dinner plates. None of them matched perfectly. Some had tiny blue flowers around the edges. Others had faded pink roses or green leaves. They looked as though they had been collected from different places over many years. Carl, without question. My brother traveled whenever he had the chance. He had a strange talent for finding unusual things in small shops, flea markets, and old markets that most people would walk past. I imagined him carrying the plates through an airport and complaining the entire way. I laughed again. Then I looked at the final gift. It was the largest of the 3. I did not even need to guess. Mom and Dad, I said. They always went too far. Birthdays, Christmas, graduations, promotions, every important moment in our lives became an excuse for them to spend more money than necessary. Buying my first home was probably the biggest excuse they had ever had. The gift was tall and flat. I pulled away the wrapping paper. A mirror. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. It was beautiful. The mirror was surrounded by a thick hand-carved wooden frame. Vines curled around the edges, twisting into small leaves and flowers. The wood was dark but polished, making it look old without appearing damaged. It had the perfect balance between antique and modern. I had spent months looking online for something almost exactly like it. I ran my fingers over the frame. The details were incredible. Each leaf had been carved separately. Tiny lines ran through the wood like veins. I could not believe my parents had found something so perfect. There was no card attached, but that did not surprise me. My parents rarely bothered with cards. I leaned the mirror carefully against the wall. Later that evening, after finishing the pizza and clearing away the wrapping paper, I sent a message to our family group chat. Thank you for the gifts. I love all of them. You're all ridiculous. Marcy replied first with several heart emojis. Carl sent a picture of himself looking proud. Mum replied, "Enjoy your first night, darling. Lock the doors." Dad sent, "Congratulations again." I smiled. No one mentioned the mirror specifically, but I did not think anything of it. I was too tired. I carried the mirror upstairs and decided to hang it above the vanity in my bedroom. It fit perfectly. Before going to sleep, I stood in front of it and looked at myself. My hair was a mess. There was dust on my shirt and I looked exhausted. Still, I smiled at my reflection. New house, I whispered. Then I climbed into bed. That night I slept better than I had in years. The next few weeks passed quietly. Slowly, the boxes disappeared. I found places for everything. Books went onto shelves. Clothes filled the wardrobes. The kitchen finally stopped looking like a storage room. The house began to feel like mine. I fell back into my usual routine. Work during the day. Dinner when I came home, a shower. Skincare, bed, nothing strange happened. Then came an ordinary Tuesday. I stayed late at work because one of my coworkers had called in sick. By the time I left the office, it was already dark. I did not get home until after 10. I was exhausted. Too tired to cook, I put a ready-made meal in the oven, ate it while standing near the kitchen counter, and left the plate in the sink. Normally, I hated leaving dishes overnight. That night, I did not care. I went upstairs, turned on the shower, and stood beneath the hot water until my muscles finally began to relax. Afterward, I wrapped myself in a towel and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. I was rubbing moisturizer into my face when something moved. Behind me. It happened so quickly that I almost missed it. Just a shape passing across the reflection. My hands froze against my cheeks. My heart skipped. I stared into the mirror. The bathroom door behind me was open. The hallway beyond it was dark. Nothing moved. I slowly lowered my hands. Hello? No answer. The entire house was silent. I turned around. Nothing. The hallway was empty. I leaned slightly out of the bathroom and looked both ways. Still nothing. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. You're tired, I whispered. That had to be it. I had been working too much. I had barely eaten properly. My brain had caught a shadow and turned it into something else. I switched off the bathroom light and went to bed. But the exhaustion was gone. The moment I closed my eyes, I saw the movement again. Something passing behind me. I rolled onto my side, then onto my back, then onto the other side. Sleep refused to come. When I was a child, mirrors had terrified me. I could never explain why. Other children were afraid of monsters beneath their beds or something hiding inside the wardrobe. For me, it had always been mirrors. I hated looking into them at night. I hated walking past dark windows because they became mirrors after sunset. There was always a feeling that if I stared too long, my reflection would do something I did not, or something else would appear behind me. As I grew older, the fear faded. At least, I thought it had. Lying there in the darkness, I became angry with myself. I was an adult. I owned a house. I could not allow an old childhood fear to return because of one shadow. I reached over and switched on the bedside lamp. Warm yellow light filled the bedroom. My eyes immediately moved toward the mirror above the vanity. It reflected part of my bed, the open bedroom door, and the hallway outside. I stared at it. Nothing, I almost laughed. Then someone stepped into view. A woman. My body became completely still. She stood in the hallway. At least, she stood in the hallway inside the mirror. I turned my eyes toward the real doorway. Empty, I looked back. The woman remained. She wore ordinary pajamas, gray trousers, and a loose white shirt. She looked around my age, maybe slightly older. Her dark hair fell around her shoulders. She stood completely still and stared directly toward me through the reflection. Not at the mirror. At me. My mouth went dry. I wanted to turn around again. I could not move. The woman slowly tilted her head. I shut my eyes. No, I kept them closed for several seconds. When I finally opened them again, she was gone. I did not remember switching off the lamp. I do not remember how I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke exhausted. Sunlight filled the room. The mirror looked completely normal. I stood in front of it for several minutes. Nothing appeared. I convinced myself it had been a dream, a half-awake hallucination, stress, anything except what I remembered. I went to work. The next evening, I came home just before 7. I kicked off my shoes in the hallway and looked toward the decorative mirror hanging near the entrance. I had bought that one myself months ago. I looked at my reflection automatically. Someone was sitting on my couch. I stopped breathing. An old man. He sat with both hands resting on his knees. His clothes looked outdated. A dark jacket, brown trousers, heavy shoes. His face was pale and thin. I spun around. The living room was empty. I looked back into the hallway mirror. The old man was still sitting there. This time, his head had turned toward me. His eyes met mine. I screamed. The reflection did not react. I backed away until I hit the wall. Then I covered the mirror with my coat. For several minutes, I stood in the hallway shaking. After that, everything got worse. Over the next week, they appeared everywhere, not only in mirrors. Any reflective surface could show them. One morning, while brushing my teeth, I saw a tall man standing inside the bathroom mirror. He was behind me in the reflection. He wore a wet black coat. Water dripped from his hair. When I turned around, the bathroom was empty. I looked back. He had moved closer. Another evening, I turned off the television and saw an elderly woman reflected in the black screen. She stood directly behind the couch. Her face was covered in bruises. Her mouth opened slowly. I turned around. Nothing. When I faced the television again, her mouth was closed. A few days later, I placed my phone face up on the kitchen table. The screen was black. A little girl appeared in the reflection. She could not have been older than 6. She wore a yellow dress. She stared upward at me. I dropped the phone. When I picked it up again, she was gone. The worst one happened in the kitchen. I was heating soup in the microwave. As I waited, I looked at the dark glass door. A teenage boy stood behind me. His face was burned. One side of his mouth had been destroyed. He was smiling. I turned around so quickly that I knocked a chair over. No one was there. When I looked back at the microwave, the boy was closer. I unplugged it and covered the door with a towel. I began losing sleep. Every reflection became a threat. Windows at night, metal spoons, the dark screen of my laptop, even the surface of water in a glass. Sometimes I thought I could see faces forming there. I told myself it was my old fear returning. I told myself I was stressed. The move had been difficult. Work was exhausting. I was barely sleeping, and lack of sleep could make people see things. That explanation worked during daylight. At night, I knew it was a lie. The people in the reflections were real, or real enough. I started covering everything. First, the bathroom mirror. Then, the vanity mirror. Then the hallway mirror. I used sheets, towels, newspapers, and blankets. The television was covered with an old duvet. I taped newspaper over the microwave. I closed the curtains before sunset so the windows would not reflect the room. I even turned my phone face down whenever I was not using it. The house changed completely. The place that had once felt warm and peaceful became dark and claustrophobic. Every covered mirror looked like a hidden doorway. I began avoiding certain rooms entirely. Still, I could feel them, the people, even when I could not see them. Sometimes I heard faint tapping from behind the covered glass. Other times the newspapers moved slightly, even though there was no breeze. Once, at 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of someone scratching the vanity mirror beneath the newspaper. Slow, careful, scratch, scratch, scratch. I stayed beneath the blanket until sunrise. Eventually, I could not take it anymore. I called my mom. The moment I heard her voice, I broke down. "Amelia? Mom, what's wrong?" I tried to answer normally. Instead, I started crying. Hard. The kind of crying where you can barely breathe. She immediately became worried. "Amelia, talk to me. Are you hurt?" "No. Is someone in the house?" "I don't know. What does that mean?" I told her everything. The woman in the bedroom mirror. The old man on the couch. The little girl in my phone. The burned boy. I told her about covering every reflective surface in the house. I even admitted that my childhood fear of mirrors had returned. Mom listened without interrupting. Then I told her about the mirror she and Dad had given me, the beautiful wooden one. I explained that the first woman had appeared in that mirror. Silence. At first I thought the call had dropped. "Mom?" "Nothing." "Mom, are you there?" Finally, she spoke. Her voice sounded different. "Quiet, careful, Amelia. We never bought you a mirror." I stopped breathing. "What?" "We didn't buy you a mirror." I laughed nervously. "Yes, you did." "No, Mom. It was with the other gifts. We bought the plates." My stomach tightened. "What?" "Your father and I bought the vintage plates. Carl helped us pick them." I stared toward the staircase. "Then, who bought the mirror?" "I don't know." "What about Marcy?" "Marcy painted the mug." "Carl? He hasn't bought you anything yet. He said he wanted to find the right gift when he travels next month." I could hear my own heartbeat. "No, Amelia? There were 3 gifts. We only brought 2. I gripped the phone tighter. "That's impossible. Listen to me." Her voice had become serious. "Do not touch that mirror." I looked upstairs again. "Why?" "I don't know. But if none of us brought it, I want you out of that house. Mom, leave now. Go to a hotel. Come here. I don't care where. Just leave." I should have listened. Instead, I hung up. I had to know. Maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe my family had forgotten. Maybe someone had left the mirror by accident. There had to be an explanation. I walked upstairs. Each step felt louder than the last. The bedroom door was open. The vanity mirror remained covered with newspaper. I stood in front of it. My hands were shaking. For nearly a minute I did nothing. Then I pulled away one piece of paper. Nothing. I removed another. Then another. Finally, the entire mirror was exposed. It reflected my room, the bed, the wardrobe, the open door. Me, nothing else. I stared. Empty, I almost laughed from relief. Maybe this really had been stress. Maybe I needed sleep and a doctor, not an exorcist. I turned around. The bedroom was empty. I looked under the bed. Nothing. I checked the hallway. Empty. I slowly turned back toward the mirror. The woman was standing directly behind me, closer than she had ever been. Her face was only inches from the back of my head. I could see every detail. Her skin was gray. Dark lines ran beneath her eyes. Her lips were dry and cracked. I wanted to turn around. Before I could move, her mouth opened. Her lips formed 2 words. "Don't look." My body froze. For a second, I did not understand. Then I realized something. She was not looking at me. She was looking over my shoulder. at something behind me. Every instinct told me to keep staring into the mirror. Do not turn. Do not look. I do not know why I ignored her. Maybe panic. Maybe curiosity. Maybe because people always want to see the thing they have been warned about. I turned around. The room was empty. For half a second, relief rushed through me. Then the bedroom door slammed shut. The lights went out. Something breathed behind me. Not from the room, from the mirror. I turned back. The glass was no longer reflecting my bedroom. It showed another room. Old, dark, the walls were covered in rotting wallpaper. Dozens of people stood inside. The same people I had been seeing for weeks. The old man, the elderly woman, the little girl, the burned teenage boy, the wet man from the bathroom. All of them. They stood together, staring toward me. The woman in pajamas was closest. Her face was filled with terror. She raised one hand and pressed it against the other side of the glass. Then I saw what they were afraid of. Something moved behind them. It was tall, much taller than any person. Its body seemed thin at first, but as it moved between the figures, its shape changed. Arms became too long. The head bent sideways. Its face was smooth and empty. No eyes, no nose, only a wide black opening where the mouth should have been. The people moved away from it. The creature reached for the little girl. I heard a faint scream through the glass. I stepped backward. The thing stopped. Its head turned toward me. It had noticed me. The dark mouth slowly opened wider. The mirror shook. I ran. I reached the bedroom door and pulled at the handle. Locked, I twisted it harder. Nothing. Behind me, glass cracked. I looked back. A thin black line had appeared across the mirror. Then another. The creature pressed one long hand against the inside. The glass bent outward. Not broke. Bent, like skin. I grabbed a chair and threw it at the mirror. The chair struck the surface. The glass exploded. For 1 second, everything went black. Then the bedroom door opened. I ran downstairs. I did not stop for shoes. I did not grab my bag. I took my phone and car keys and left the house. I drove to my parents' home. I did not tell them what I had seen. Not all of it. I only said the mirror was gone. That was enough. I stayed there for several nights. Eventually, Dad went back to my house with Carl. They searched the bedroom. The mirror was gone. Not broken. Gone, there was no glass on the floor. No frame. Nothing. The wall above the vanity had 4 small holes where the mirror had been mounted. Dad asked me who had hung it. I said I had. He pointed out something I had never noticed. There had never been any hooks on the back. No wire. No brackets. Nothing that should have allowed it to hang on the wall. Still it had. I moved back into the house several weeks later. For a while, everything seemed normal. The reflections stopped. I uncovered the television. I removed the newspaper from the microwave. I bought a new bathroom mirror. I did not replace the one above the vanity. I left the wall empty. Months passed. I started sleeping again. Eventually, I convinced myself whatever had happened was over. Then, last night I woke at 2:17 in the morning. Someone was whispering my name. Amelia. I sat up. The room was dark. Amelia, the voice came from across the room. From the vanity. There was no mirror there, only the dark wall. I turned on the lamp. Nothing. I nearly convinced myself I had dreamed it. Then I noticed something carved into the wooden surface of the vanity. 2 words. Don't look. I stared at them. A cold feeling spread through my body. Then my phone lit up on the bedside table. The screen was black except for an incoming video call. No number, no name. I should have ignored it. Instead, I answered. The screen showed my bedroom. From behind me, I was sitting on the bed, holding the phone. The camera angle seemed to come from the empty wall above the vanity. I turned slowly toward it. There was still no camera, no mirror. Nothing on the phone screen. Someone stepped into view behind me. The woman in pajamas. She looked worse than before. Half her face was missing. She raised one finger to her lips. Then she pointed toward the space beneath my bed. Her lips moved. Don't look. This time, I listened. I stayed completely still until morning. When sunlight finally entered the room, I looked beneath the bed. Nothing was there, but the floorboards were covered in deep scratches, and resting in the middle of them was a small piece of carved wood. A vine, exactly like the ones that had surrounded the mirror. I have not slept since. Every reflective surface in the house is covered again. I keep thinking about that woman. At first I thought she was trying to scare me. Now I believe she was trying to protect me. Maybe all of them were. The old man, the little girl, the burned boy. Maybe they were not appearing because they wanted to enter my world. Maybe they were trapped inside the mirror. Maybe each of them had once owned it. Maybe each one had ignored the same warning. I keep asking myself where the mirror came from. Who wrapped it? Who placed it beside my family's gifts? How did it know exactly what kind of mirror I had been searching for online? And why did it choose me? There is one thing that frightens me more than all of that. A few minutes ago, I walked past the covered television. Something moved beneath the blanket. I heard fingernails scrape slowly across the screen from the inside. Then the woman's voice whispered through the fabric. Amelia. I did not answer. She whispered again, whatever you do. The blanket began to lift at one corner. I stepped backward. Her voice became desperate. Don't look. So I am sitting here with my eyes closed. Something is moving around the room. I can hear slow footsteps crossing the floor. They stop sometimes, then begin again. A few seconds ago, something leaned close enough that I felt cold breath against my face. I am still not opening my eyes, because I finally understand. The people in the mirrors were never the monsters. They were warnings. And whatever they were warning me about has finally found a way out. Story 5. Jake Thompson was the first boy I ever truly hated. He was 13 when he called me a slut because I bled through my skirt during class. I had gotten my period unexpectedly. I remember standing up from my chair and hearing someone behind me laugh. When I turned around, there was a dark red stain on the plastic seat. Jake pointed at it. Jesus, what a slut. Half the class laughed with him. I wanted to disappear. Our teacher told him to be quiet, but Jake only leaned back in his chair with that smug little smile he always wore. Back then, he was only cruel. A few months later, he could control people's bodies with his mind. Noah Sparrow was worse. He was the captain of the junior varsity football team, tall and handsome, with the kind of smile teachers trusted automatically. Everybody knew he hit his girlfriend. We saw him shove her against lockers, grab her wrist hard enough to leave bruises, and drag her around school like she was a doll. Nobody did anything. Then Noah turned 13. One afternoon, Orange fire appeared across his fingertips. At first, everyone thought someone had brought a lighter into class. Then the flames spread across both of Noah's hands without burning him. He laughed. That was the first thing he did. He laughed. The second thing he did was burn a hole through his desk. Within weeks, boys across the country began developing impossible abilities. Flying, teleportation, telekinesis, strength, fire, mind control. Regeneration, some could hear thoughts. Others could change the temperature of a room or stop people from moving. At first, scientists called it a biological mystery. Churches called it a blessing. Politicians called it proof. Proof of what depended on who was speaking. Some said God had finally revealed the natural order. Others said men had always been stronger, and nature had simply made the difference obvious. The first time I understood how dangerous the world had become was when my neighbor killed his family. His son had developed some kind of heat-based ability. The boy had gotten angry because his mother took away his video games. Their house burned down in less than 5 minutes. His parents and younger sister never made it outside. People called it a tragedy. Nobody called the boy a murderer. They said he was too young to control his gift. Then Noah Sparrow lost his temper with his girlfriend. He tore her head from her body, not with his hands. He used fire and pressure somehow. Nobody fully understood what happened. One moment she was standing near the gym doors crying, and the next her body collapsed. Noah was taken away for 3 days. Then he came back to school. His parents had money. His coach said he had an important future. A church group stood outside holding signs that read, "Protect our blessed sons." The same week, Jake Thompson forced 3 teachers to gouge out their own eyes. He said they had embarrassed him. The school finally called an emergency assembly. But only the female students were required to attend. We gathered inside the gym while male teachers stood at every exit. Girls cried quietly around me. Some already had bruises. Some had brothers at home who had started developing powers. Some had fathers who suddenly believed the whole world had changed in their favor. A woman from the government stood at the center of the basketball court and explained the new safety rules. We were told not to provoke powered males. We were told not to argue. We were told to report unusual behavior. Most importantly, we were told to protect ourselves by changing our own behavior. I remember standing between 2 friends, trembling. That was when I knew this was not a gift from God. I did not care what churches said. I did not care how many religious leaders appeared on television explaining that boys were now clearly the superior sex. The phenomenon spread. Almost every case involved boys around the age of 13. Scientists eventually gave it a name, idiopathic hormonal genetic disorder. ICT, the name sounded medical. Clean, harmless. There was nothing harmless about it. I grew up in a world that changed faster than anyone could understand. Laws appeared almost overnight. Boys with abilities became celebrities. Television hosts invited them onto programs and asked them to perform tricks. A 12-year-old boy who could levitate became the face of a shoe company. A 14-year-old with super strength appeared in military advertisements. Jake Thompson ended up in Hollywood. By 15, he was starring in action movies. Nobody talked about the teachers anymore. Politicians began speaking openly about a new social order. One senator laughed during an interview and said, "What do women have? Baby making? My grandson can fly." The clip was replayed for weeks. People thought it was funny. By my junior year of high school, Girls were required to wear shirts with sleeves. They said exposed shoulders distracted powered boys and might cause emotional incidents. A few months later, skirts were banned at school. Then pants were regulated too. By senior year, girls were no longer allowed to continue education beyond middle school unless they received special approval from a male guardian. Education, according to the government, had become socially distracting. Women were encouraged to marry young. We were told our responsibility was stability, marriage, children, support. I was told to find a man and settle down. For years, I had watched boys use their abilities to hurt anyone weaker than themselves. So when I met Flo, I thought I had won the lottery. Flo was different. At least, that was what I believed. He rarely discussed his ability. He never demonstrated it in public. He said power should only be used in emergencies. That alone made him seem almost heroic. When other men bragged, Flo stayed quiet. When his friends joked about powerless people, he changed the subject. When strangers made comments about women, he rolled his eyes. I fell in love with him because in a world full of monsters, he seemed normal. Kind, safe. We married when I was 23. 2 years later, his father invited us to a cookout for his 50th birthday. Calling it a cookout was generous. It was more like a small family celebration where the women cooked, served, cleaned, and smiled while the men drank wine and talked. As soon as I entered the kitchen, my sister-in-law Annalise handed me a light pink apron. There was a bow stitched across the front. I stared at it. "You cannot be serious." She bit back a laugh. I wish I wasn't. I pulled my dark hair into a tight ponytail while Annalise tied the apron around my waist. That was when I noticed something strange. Her hair was loose. Long brown strands fell below her shoulders. "You're not wearing a hairnet," I whispered. She shrugged. "It's family. Your father-in-law considers this public enough to enforce every other stupid rule." The female hygiene law had been introduced several years earlier. Women were expected to remain clean-shaven, including facial and body hair. Hair on the head could not fall freely past shoulder length at official events. It had to be cut or tied back. The government claimed the laws were about health and cleanliness. Everyone knew they were about control. I had spent almost an hour that morning shaving and plucking myself. Annalise leaned closer and pushed several strands behind my ear. Then she frowned. "You missed one." "What?" "Chin." She pulled a pair of tweezers from her apron pocket. I sighed. "Go ahead." She caught the tiny hair and pulled. I almost squeaked. While her face was only inches from mine, I lowered my voice. "I had another abortion." Her hand froze. I swallowed. "Another one." She pulled the hair free. "Sweetie, didn't you just have one? I've been to the clinic 6 times. Annalise stared at me. My stomach twisted. "The doctor says it keeps failing." Her lips parted slightly. "That's impossible." "I know." Before she could say more, a voice came from outside. "Cadence, my father-in-law, get out here." Now, we're waiting. Annalise closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she smiled through clenched teeth. "Coming, Father." I hated that man. Unfortunately, hating him and surviving him were 2 different things. I had learned to stay polite, never challenge him directly, never embarrass him, never make him angry. His ability was never discussed openly, and I had no interest in learning exactly what he could do. I walked outside wearing the apron, bright red lipstick, and the short skirt he had specifically asked me to wear. He believed women should look feminine at family gatherings. Alex and Connor, Flo's older brothers, sat near him drinking wine. Alex could fly. Connor could teleport. Both had developed their abilities around 13. Then there was Ben. Ben was 21 and had never developed anything. He knelt on the grass in front of a metal dog bowl. Dry pet food filled it. His shirt was gone. Dirt covered his chest and arms. His hair had grown down his back in tangled knots. He stared at the food without moving. Being a woman placed you near the bottom of society. Being a powerless man was somehow worse. When Ben was younger, his father had forced him to wear a collar. I had seen old photographs. A leash clipped to his neck. A bowl on the floor. His brothers laughing. They had made him bark before meals. Apparently, humiliation was supposed to motivate his power to appear. It never did. Cadence, my father-in-law, looked me up and down. His eyes stopped on my stomach. A smile formed. I'm looking forward to you giving me a grandson. I forced myself to smile. That isn't something I'm planning right now. His grin became wider. You'd better plan quickly. He slapped my shoulder hard enough to make me step sideways. You're 25 now. Remember your body clock. Before I could respond, someone called my name. Katie. Flo ran across the yard. His cheeks were red. He looked furious. Why is my wife serving? His father's smile disappeared. Flo grabbed my hand. Go inside and change. I stared at him. What? Into a dress. Something comfortable. He squeezed my fingers reassuringly. That tiny gesture almost made me cry. In a world full of men who used their powers to control women, I had somehow found lightning in a bottle. Flo looked at his father. It's okay if she doesn't serve, right, Dad? His voice remained polite, but the message was clear. His father stared at him for several seconds. Then he shrugged. Whatever. Flo smiled. Thanks. He took me inside and picked out a bright yellow summer dress. I changed. When we returned to the yard, Flo walked directly toward Ben. His younger brother was still kneeling in front of the dog food. Dude, Flo said softly. Ben did not respond. Flo grabbed his arm and carefully pulled him upright. Ben's legs shook. His eyes remained fixed on the buffet table. Cupcakes, sandwiches, grilled meat. A thin line of drool escaped the corner of his mouth. Flo gave him a gentle push. Go eat something real. Ben hesitated, then slowly walked toward the table. Their father watched without speaking. Later, while Flo and I were getting food, he leaned close to me. How was the clinic? My stomach tightened. It failed again. His expression immediately softened. I'm sorry. I looked away. Do you want me to come with you next time? His hand touched my stomach. I can be moral support. I smiled weakly. Yeah, so he came with me. At the clinic, we sat in the waiting room for almost an hour. Pregnancy termination had become complicated after the new laws. Women were technically allowed abortions in certain situations, but access depended heavily on male approval. Flo had signed every form without argument. That was another reason I trusted him. When my name was called, he stood and followed me into the examination room. The nurse was older, maybe in her 50s. She closed the door behind us and reviewed the paperwork. Her expression changed as she read. She looked at me, then at Flo, then back at the file. You've been here before. Yes, how many times? I knew she already had the answer. 6. Flo rubbed my shoulder. The nurse pressed her lips together. She explained the procedure again, then discussed possible complications. Finally, she turned toward Flo. Can I speak to your wife privately? He raised his eyebrows. I know it's technically not allowed, the nurse continued quickly, but I'd like to ask her some personal questions. Flo did not hesitate. Of course. He hugged me. Good luck, babe, thanks. He kissed my forehead and left the room. The door closed. The nurse waited. 1 second. 2, 3. Then she walked over and locked it. My heartbeat changed. What if she sat directly in front of me? Cadence. Her voice was quiet. You have not had 6 abortions. I frowned. Yes, I have. No, I came here 6 times. I know. She opened the file. You have had 1 abortion 6 times. I stared at her. That doesn't make any sense. Exactly. She moved closer. The fetus was removed during the first procedure. A cold feeling moved through my stomach. Then why did I test pregnant again? That is what I'm asking. I don't know. The tissue samples match? What? The pregnancy has been identical every time. She tapped the file. Same genetic profile. Same developmental markers. Same implantation pattern. I felt dizzy. That's impossible. Yes, the room seemed smaller. I suddenly became aware of the medical instruments behind me. The fluorescent lights. The smell of disinfectant. The locked door. The nurse lowered her voice even further. Privately, between you and me, she looked directly into my eyes. What is your husband's ability? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. What can Flo do? My first instinct was to say I did not know. Flo never used his power openly. He avoided demonstrations. He always said abilities were dangerous. Then memories began moving through my head. Flo healing a cut on his thumb so quickly I thought I had imagined it. Flo breaking his wrist during a fall and refusing to go to the hospital. The next morning, he was fine. Flo telling me he never got sick. Flo touching Ben's bruised shoulder at the cookout. Flo placing his hand on my stomach every time I returned from the clinic. Gentle, loving, reassuring. I felt sick. The nurse watched my face. You know. I swallowed. Yes, what is it? I could barely say the word. Healing. The nurse's expression changed. Not surprise. Fear. My stomach turned violently. I pressed both hands against it. No. The nurse stood quickly. Cadence. No. I remembered the first procedure. Flo waiting for me outside. Flo hugging me afterward. His hand resting on my abdomen during the drive home. You're okay, he had whispered. The second time, he had done the same thing. The third. The fourth. The fifth. Every time I returned from the clinic, Flo touched my stomach. Every single time. I stood so fast the chair tipped over. Oh my God. The nurse grabbed my shoulders. Keep your voice down. He knew. I don't know. He knew. Cadence, he kept putting it back. Her grip tightened. We don't know that. Yes, we do. My voice shook. He heals things. The word things suddenly sounded horrible. He had never said people. He had never explained the limits. I imagined the procedure undoing itself beneath his hand. Torn tissue reconnecting. Blood vessels rebuilding. Cells returning. Something that had been removed somehow growing back as though the body had decided nothing had happened. The nurse looked toward the door. How far along are you? 10 weeks. She looked at the file. No, I stared at her. What? The fetus measures 10 weeks. Yes, you first came here 4 months ago. My mouth went dry. That can't be right. That's why I asked about his ability. I sat down slowly. My hands were shaking. What do I do? The nurse did not answer. What do I do? She looked terrified. I don't know. You're a nurse. I've never seen this before. Can you remove it again? She hesitated. Yes, and then what? Silence. I already knew. Flo would touch me. He would smile. He would call me babe. He would rub my stomach. And whatever we removed would come back. The nurse walked to a small cabinet and began searching through it. We may need to document this differently. No. She turned. What? If it's documented, he'll know. Cadence, you don't understand. I understand more than you think. No, I thought about Flo's family. His father expecting a grandson. His brothers with their powers. Ben eating from a dog bowl because he had no. Flo defending me at the cookout. Flo helping Ben stand. Flo being kind. Flo being perfect. Maybe kindness had never been the opposite of control. Maybe it was only another way to hide it. I covered my mouth. Why? The nurse looked at me. Why would he do this? She did not answer, but I knew. Because I had told him repeatedly that I did not want a child. Because his father wanted a grandson. Because Flo wanted one too. Because in this world, wanting something had become enough for men to believe they deserved it. My eyes filled with tears. I remembered something from our wedding night. Flo lying beside me, his fingers drawing slow circles across my stomach. One day he had whispered, "We'll have a little boy." I had laughed. Maybe. He kissed me. No, we will. At the time I thought he was being romantic. Now the memory made me want to tear my skin off. A knock came at the door. "Everything okay in there?" Flo called. The nurse and I froze. His voice was warm, concerned, the same voice I had trusted for years. I stared at the door. The nurse mouthed, "Don't say anything." Another knock. "Katie?" I swallowed. "I'm fine." "You sure?" "Yes, okay, babe." His footsteps moved away. The nurse let out a breath. I looked down at my stomach. For the first time, I imagined something inside me not as a baby, but as a wound that refused to stay closed. A wound Flo kept healing. I whispered, "Can you take it out again?" "Yes, and can I leave through another exit?" She hesitated. "There's a staff door." "Good. I can't promise he won't find you. I know. And if he touches you, I know." The nurse crouched in front of me. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the locked door. I thought about Jake Thompson laughing at the blood on my chair. Noah Sparrow smiling while fire moved across his hands. Politicians joking about women. Schools closing their doors to girls. My father-in-law watching my stomach as if he already owned whatever came from it. Then I thought about Flo. My gentle husband, my safe husband, the one man I believed was different. I had spent years fearing men who used their powers openly. I had never considered how much worse it might be when a man loved you enough to use his secretly. "I'm going to disappear," I whispered. The nurse nodded. Then I heard Flo's voice outside again. Closer this time. "Cadence?" The handle moved. The locked door shook once. "Why is this locked?" The nurse stood. My heart began pounding. He knocked again. "Babe?" His voice was still gentle. Still loving. Still Flo. "Open the door." The nurse looked at me. I looked at my stomach. Then his hand struck the door. The wood around the lock cracked. Cadence. His tone had changed. Only slightly, but enough. "Open the door." I finally understood why he had never shown me what his power could really do. Healing was not harmless. Healing was not kind. Not when the person being healed did not want to be restored. Not when a wound needed to stay a wound. Not when something needed to end. And as the door began to break beneath his hands, I realized the worst part. I had been terrified of men who could burn cities, control minds, and tear people apart. I had married the one man who could make sure nothing I chose would ever stay undone.